So a fortified wine is going to be a base wine that is then fortified or added to with a spirit that is higher in alcohol.
Usually a local brandy or some sort of grain alcohol that's local to a particular area.
Fermentation has been halted by the addition of a spirit,
which will then leave a certain amount of sugar in the resulting fortified wine, depending on when that spirit is added.
You know, wine back in the day, anyway, we're talking 100+ years ago, didn't travel very well. So if you were to take barrels of wine overseas to different countries for trade, it would spoil by the time it would get there. So in order to strengthen the wine, fortify it, they would add a local brandy of the area to the wine and then ship it off.
John Woodhouse in Portugal halted fermentation by adding spirit, but he didn't know he was halting fermentation. He thought he was just adding spirit to the wine for his long voyage. He thought that, oh, if I added this spirit, then maybe my wine will last longer. And it worked. It went extremely well.
Now, what ended up happening is when it was received, a lot of these places tended to enjoy that new flavor profile of this wine, so it kind of caught on as like a way to make wine. So the reasons for fortification a long time ago are much different than the reasons for fortification today. Fortification today is meant more for creating a particular style of wine or a flavor profile of a wine, less so for practical travel reasons. Like we don't have any issues shipping wine across the world nowadays.
The most famous three are going to be port, Madeira, and sherry. Port and Madeira are both from Portugal. Port is made using several different grapes, a couple of the most famous which are Touriga Nacional, Touriga Franca.
Port is made through a process called moutage. So basically you harvest your grapes, you start fermenting them. When they get to a particular alcohol percentage, you would add the brandy in this case the aguardiente. And what that does is it raises the alcohol level to a point where the yeast can't handle it anymore. Yeast only really work up to a certain alcohol percentage, somewhere in the vicinity of like 16%. So once you hit that point, it kills off all the yeasts. So that fermentation is then halted, and any sugars that were present in the must that would normally be eaten up during a full fermentation are left over. So then you're left also with a sweeter wine. So you have a wine that's, call it 18% or so alcohol, that also has residual sugar.
Port is generally going to be a sweeter style of fortified wine across the board. The styles vary differently depending on if it's a vintage port, because they'll only call vintages in port if it's an extraordinary vintage, similar to champagne. You have your younger, your ruby ports, which are much more approachable, a little sweeter. You have your tawny ports. So you have all these different styles within port, but they all are going to be, generally across the board, a sweeter style of fortified wine. And then moving on to Madeira, which I love. I love Madeira. People need to drink more Madeira. So it is heated through various different methods, either kind of like in a sauna. Sometimes they will just leave it out in the sun for decades. And then they'll stabilize it, cool it down, bottle it, and then age it for even longer. And so yeah, we're kind of replicating that sea voyage. There are a bunch of different styles of Madeira as well, some being very dry. The Surcial grape is made into a Madeira that's very, very dry. Crazy acidity. I've heard it described once as like salted caramel without the sugar, and it's awesome. So, so good. It's great with like matured, aged cheeses, or just by itself. And then it progressively gets sweeter. You have your Boal style, your Verdelho, into your Malvasia, which is gonna be the sweetest style. But Madeira still has crazy acidity to balance it out. All you need is a little bit. It's fantastic. Madeira is basically indestructible because of the way it's made. So you can open that bottle and it'll probably outlive you, which is awesome.
Sherry is, a different beast altogether.
There's a misconception with sherry that it's always going to be sweet, as popularized by Fraser, because he's drinking a cream sherry, which is, the Spanish will tell you, not a real sherry, which is fine. We'll forgive him. Most sherries are going to be basically bone dry.
Sherry's defined by flor, which is a yeast that grows on the top of the wine in barrel,
which prevents the wine from being affected by oxygen, for the most part.
You're either trying to prevent that yeast from growing by adding fortification, or you're protecting it after the fact.
The flor imparts this really doughy, kind of yeasty quality. And a Solera system, if you basically think about a pyramid of barrels, You have the very old wines on the bottom layer, slightly younger on the layer on top of that, and then it gets progressively younger. So you put your brand new sherry, if you will, into the top layer of the system, the Solera system. When you want to bottle your sherry, you pull from that bottom layer, and then slowly you move down each layer with the wine. So at the end, when you do have that bottling, it's a blend of all of these different aged sherries. There's an incredible range of sherries.
Depending on the style of sherry that you're making, you're going to actually fortify to different levels.
The manzanillas and the finos are all very bright and mineral, kind of almondy, and they're dry. They're dry, dry, dry.
Oloroso sherry, for example, that's going to have a different fortification than Amontillado.
The Amontillato's style is under that layer of floor, and then they'll move that Amontillado into a Solera system where it is getting oxygen.
Sherry is a very complex beast.
So pairing with fortified wines is very, very fun. They're very powerful, powerful wines, powerfully flavored, very complex. So pairing them with something that can stand up to that. Generally, people will pair some of the sweeter styles with dessert, because sugar like sugar. Very easy, very pairable with that. Cheeses. I love cheeses with some of these fortified wines. Nuts, charcuterie, they're great with these. But you want something that can stand up to the intensity of some of these.